All right, here we are. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I just want to say we thank God for being here today and this evening. We thank God for the purpose of who we're here. I would like, because we're in a church, I'll first introduce myself. My name is Pastor Willie Lightfoot. I'm also I'm pastor of this church, but I'm also the chair of the Rock Against Gun Violence Coalition. I'm also the city council man at large and founder of this particular program or initiative that we've been doing in the city of Rochester. If you've come in, we want to thank you for coming in. First, we want to honor a few people who are with us. Of course, first and foremost, we honor the Spirit of Christ. First and foremost, I want to honor the folks here at our church, Deacon Holly Williams, Miss Phyllis Alexander's in the back as our greeter. I want to honor Vic Saunders, special from the Mayor's Office of Violence Prevention, Kathy Richardson from the Rock Against Gun Violence Coalition. I see Pastor Williams here from the Ark of the Covenant, which next week they will be hosting this same meeting. Grateful for have him with us as well. Dassy from our office, as well as Andre from our office as well. And I saw earlier that was in the building, Mercedes Vasquez was here, who is the vice president of the Monroe County Legislature, and she's a legislator for this particular area as well. And so we honor her, Legislator Mercedes as well. So, and then I would ask if you would mind, those who I did not call, if you would come up to that mic and just give your name and where organizations you may be with. Yep, right. Just your name and your organization that you're with, please.
I'm just a citizen who lives in the city, and I'm concerned and interested. So if
Absolutely. How did you hear about us via television?
I follow a website.
Okay.
It might be the city council, yours,
Yes.
or maybe Rock Connect.
Rock Against Gun Violence Coalition.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
yeah.
Instagram.
So my
maybe?
name's Holly Merrill.
Hello, Holly. Welcome. Welcome.
Aaron Mathis, resident, also member of Rock Against Gun Violence Coalition.
Yes. Welcome, Karen. My sister, come on up. Don't be shy.
Hi, I'm Cheryl Robinson. I'm not representing any specific organization, just neighbors across the city that are fed up with the gun violence.
Amen.
So I just want to learn as much as I can learn.
Amen. All right. Well, once again, we're going to have prayer in a minute. But there are a couple of scriptures, since we're in the church, and I would be remiss if I just didn't put this out here, that really came to me as I was coming to the church this evening. And it was Matthew chapter 5:9 says, Jesus said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, because they will be called the sons of God." In Hebrews chapter 12, verse 14, pursue peace with all men and holiness, without which no one will see the Lord. How will we see how important peace is to producing holiness? So I really feel like we are peacemakers. That's the whole purpose of what we're doing, is to create peace in our city, peace in our community. So we'll just pray. God, we pray that this meeting, we thank you for Steve being with us. We thank you for everyone who's represented here. We thank you for everyone on the sound of my voice. We're so grateful that we're able to come together to talk about this very pressing, serious issue that's really plaguing communities across the country, but intentionally and specifically the city of Rochester. And we're just praying that our efforts, God, that you bless them, that we be able to eradicate and educate and advocate around ending gun violence within our city. And we thank you for everyone who's helping to be a part of that. And we give you all the glory. In your son, Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you. So once again, just to give you a little brief background, the information that you have with you, the first piece of paper that you have is a double sheet. That is just history and information about the creation and the purpose of the Rock Against Gun Violence Coalition, okay? And so that's an informative piece that we have here. Last year we were here, we had a national youth or a national gun violence summit that was brought to us by Clergy for Safe Cities, Pastor Gil Monroe, who is the person, the faith-based initiative coordinator for the mayor of New York City, and 67 clergy director of that particular program down in New York City, in Brooklyn. and they brought, they're part of a national organization called Clergy for Safe Cities. We came to this church. We had a summit that was highly attended, very well attended. And in that, also we produced or released the Brady Gun Trace Data Report. This report, and Steve will be talking about this soon. We're getting ready to bring Kathy up. She'll introduce Steve, but this report is historic and groundbreaking and is so transformative for our city. And Steve will expound on the fact of how rare it is for we're one of only 6 cities that actually has a report like this. And the other cities that have a report like this are like Philadelphia, Chicago, California. Can you kind of see the trend here? There are large cities. We're a mid-sized city, and we have such a report, which is extremely rare and unusual. So Rochester is kind of leading, if you will, in this area of this gun trace data and how we use this data. The other piece of information that you have is Rochester Against Gun Violence Coalition Community Review, the 2023 Brady Gun Trace Report, uncovering the truth about Rochester crime guns. This information here is staggering when you look at this information. And we're going to be talking about some of this today. We're going to break this down of why this is important and what we're doing here and how significant this work is compared to all of the other work that's being done by Vic Saunders and so many of our partners. We're all working together. No one has all of the solutions to end gun violence in our community, but collectively we can work to help fill in the gaps, if you will. And what's unique about what we're doing in the Rock Against Gun Violence Coalition is we're addressing this problem from the supply side, which is a very different conversation for most people. Most people are dealing from the prevention side, from the criminal justice side, the educational piece, which we work in those spaces too. But specifically and more intentionally, recently, because of this report, we're working to look at how we can decrease gun violence on the supply side. So we want you to really understand, why is this different, or what is this any different than any other thing ever? This is very, very different. A very different conversation that we're having here today because we're talking about it from the supply side. So I want to get out of the way because Steve is our guest speaker. He's from Cali. He's coming all the way. He's streaming in all the way from California. I wanted him to get into the meat and potatoes of what's going on. And then we'll go from there and we'll have any questions that you guys may have. We're also streaming on the City of Rochester City Council YouTube page. I also want to mention Clay Harris is with us too. Good to see Clay in the building. But I'm going to call up Kathy right now to just give us a brief overview of the importance, introduce Steve, and then we'll go from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Thank you, Councilman Lightfoot. I don't know, did I turn it off? So good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here tonight to help us uncover the truth about Rochester's crime guns. Brady is grateful to Mayor Evans, former Mayor Lovely Warren, President Miguel Melendez, all our law enforcement partners. We're especially thankful for the extraordinary work done by Brady. And we would especially like to point out our gratitude for the extraordinary leadership of Rochester City Councilman Willie Lightfoot. Councilman Lightfoot is the founder of the Rock Against Gun Violence Coalition that brings us all together tonight. He's also the steward of this report. Most people don't know that. There would be no gun trace report without Rochester City Councilman Willie Lightfoot. That's the truth. So tonight we're here to talk about the evidence of harm being inflicted on Rochester. That's what this report is. It's evidence. We're also here to talk about the truth that remains hidden from the public, redacted in our report. Suppressed evidence, leaving the public confused and to some extent subjugated to the harm being inflicted over and over and over again. A harm that was traced to crime gun supply sources who likely remain open in business and able to inflict more harm. We ask our ATF, follow the evidence. Shut down the dangerous crime gun supply sources and their tyranny of unlawful distribution of firearms, harming our families. Shut down the dangerous dealers responsible for unexplained gun losses, dealers who are the supply source for homicide guns that are used to murder our police in the line of duty. Dealers who fail to conduct a background check, who sell volumes of guns, knowing, or they should know, these guns are being diverted for trafficking. Dealers who sell guns in straw purchases that are used to murder our firefighters, our youth. Follow the evidence in our gun trace report without fear and without favor. We say to our leaders, if a child has to live under curfew and grow up under a state of emergency, crouching behind the sofa in the living room in order to dodge the bullets that are flying through the street, if a father can be murdered on his way to visiting his daughter for an Easter dinner, then surely a gun dealer with 20 crime gun traces can manage being inspected comprehensively once a year and submit a quarterly inventory report to the state police and the ATF. If a family should be forced to bear a lifetime of sorrow, burying their murdered child, visiting them annually in the cemetery, if our children must grow up rehearsing for gun violence trauma in their school, crouching under the desk, hiding in the closets to shield themselves from bullets being fired at them in their classroom, then surely gun dealers with homicide gun traces can be held to rigorous, comprehensive inspections and security and record-keeping standards with strong regulatory mandates, because their mistakes are our gun violence tragedies. Their breaches of trust through straw purchases and reckless sales, unlawful distribution of guns, and dangerous practices. They are our gun violence funerals. They are our gun violence burials of our law enforcement, our firefighters, our sons, our daughters, our loved ones. So tonight we have with us Steve Lindley. He's a national expert from Brady who travels across America helping communities just like Rochester, helping them uncover their truths about crime guns. Steve has decades of law enforcement experience as well as working with Brady's Combating Crime Guns initiative. He spent 3 decades working on state and federal legislative and regulatory efforts, and he served at the National Police Department in San Diego and the California Department of Justice, including as director for the Justice Bureau of Firearms and the Division of Law Enforcement, with over 1,100 agents and professional staff under his leadership. We are blessed to have Steve's knowledge, his dedication, and his commitment to helping Rochester create crime gun prevention strategies to help us, to help our community, to help protect our families, and to save lives. It's an honor and a privilege to welcome Steve Lindley to Rochester.
Thank you, Kathy. I'm blushing a little bit about that introduction. But I am here. I want to thank the city of Rochester, specifically Councilman Lightfoot, for his guidance on this and his patience over the past nearly 4 years in order to get this trace report out. So with that, I will share my screen so we can look at the PowerPoint. And if you have any questions, I will take questions at the end if they're pressing. please let the councilman or Kathy know, and I can answer them as we go. So I'm assuming everybody can see that. Okay. I'll move forward with it. So,
Yes, we can see it, Steve.
okay, perfect. Thank you, sir. So we need to talk about what is a firearm trace report and why is it important on a federal, state, and a community level. The first thing that firearm tracing reports do through the process of tracing crime guns through the alcohol, tobacco, firearms, and explosives is it identifies a gun's sequence of ownership. Basically, it takes it from the manufacturer to potentially the wholesaler, to the dealer, and to the first person who had purchased that firearm. Depending on the state that you might live in, like out here in California, we also track all personal sales of firearms from one person to another. So it's a little more complete information. Not every state can do that, but it gives you a history of the firearms ownership from the time that it was produced to the purchase. Most crime guns that end up on the street, they start off in the legal market. It is unusual for a manufacturer to have firearms that they just make for the illegal market. That doesn't really happen here in the U.S. So most crime guns start off with a legal sale at one point, and then because firearms can be in the community for decades, they end up on the illegal market. So one of the things we look at when it comes to these trace reports is the time to crime. That means the time that it was purchased to the time that it was recovered by law enforcement. And then that helps us identify which dealers might be acting as suppliers of crime guns. And there could be a number of reasons why that is, both just with lack of education, lack of overview, or they are actually illegally selling these firearms. So other trace reports that are out there, because of the Tier-Hart Amendment, which I'll talk about a little bit later, it's very difficult to get trace information from the federal government in order to collect this information. The few that are out there are the state of Pennsylvania, the state of New York, state of California, Chicago, and Rochester. So California is a little bit unique in how we handle firearm sales out here, but even then there are limitations. So the fact that Rochester has really shown leadership in pushing forward a trace report is very unique in the nation and shows great leadership in finding different solutions to a crime gun problem and to the gun violence in our communities. There's no one solution that's going to solve everything, but it is going to be a comprehensive approach. And this is part of that approach, is looking at where the data can lead and looking at the suppliers of the firearms, not just the end users. So again, this is very unique. All right, supply side solutions. I talked about that a little bit, is in improving dealer business practices. Like I said before, most firearms that end up as crime guns come through the legal market. So at some point, there was a business that had that. Now, depending on the city that you're in, law enforcement takes an active role in preventing gun violence. But there are things that we can do to help law enforcement. Community-based organizations in order to deter other types of violence is one of them, but also finding out where the firearms are coming from. And if that was a legal transaction, an illegal transaction, but as we'll talk about here a little bit later, you'll find out that a little bit of action on the supply side of this issue can result in vast positive impacts to reducing gun violence in our communities. It's also crucial to hold gun dealers accountable, which we'll talk about here shortly. Most gun dealers do an excellent job and they're very professional in their action, and they are the first line of defense in making sure that firearms are not illegally sold. However, there are some gun dealers that do a poor job at that, and some just do an illegal job. Part of looking at the supply side solutions is looking for those few dealers that are causing the problems and either educate, retrain, or enforce their license. We're shifting the burden of preventing gun violence away from the community or the end user to a little bit about the industry that's applying this. We have over 400 million firearms in the United States. That's more firearms than we have people. So a lot of rhetoric gets talked about that we need more firearms, we need more people to be armed. If that was the case, where just the number of firearms that are in circulation makes us a safe community, we should be the safest nation in the world. And that's actually not the case. And then finally is educate and compliance of these dealers with the laws, not only of a particular city, county, state, and the federal government, to make sure that they're doing their business professionally and ethically. Excuse me. So looking at the crime guns that were recovered between 2012 and 2022, information that was provided by the Rochester Police Department, they've done an excellent job over the last decade in recovering firearms and actually tracing them. So there was a total of 6,036 firearms that were recovered by the police department during that 10-year period. Handgun recoveries, just like in Rochester compared to other cities in the nation, rose dramatically over the past decade, from 50%, 57% in 2012 to 83% in 2022. And that's a bit of a national trend in the purchase of firearms away from hunting style shotguns and rifles that were done decades ago to more handguns that are purchased at most dealers. So when we see more handguns in circulation, we're going to see more handguns being recovered at crime scenes. And then the old proverbial Saturday night special, basically the cheap, not well manufactured firearm recoveries have gone down, but they've been replaced with ghost gun recoveries. And those have gone up dramatically in Rochester, just like they've gone up dramatically across the nation. So ghost guns is a major issue. Both the federal government and a number of states, including New York, have taken action in order to try and reduce, if not eliminate, the ghost gun problems that we're having. And basically what ghost guns are is they're firearm kits that are not completely put together or completely manufactured. Allows a person to make a couple of drill holes, sand, some plastic, and put the firearm together. And previously to ATF's new regulations, those weren't considered firearms. They were considered basically just pieces of metal and plastic. Therefore, they didn't require a serial number, and therefore they didn't require to go through a background check. So they were, in my opinion, they were tailor-made to the illegal market. And as we've seen in recoveries throughout the nation, that's exactly who law enforcement is recovering those firearms from. So additionally, over 5,000 guns were traced to a dealer by the Rochester Police Department through ATF. So again, they're doing an excellent job in recovering and tracing the firearms and finding out where they're coming from. These guns were originally sold by over 2,000 different dealers. And that's not unusual if you look at the reports, the few reports that are out there, or you look at the data that does come out of ATF, is it's sometimes difficult for dealers not to have a firearm traced to them, because if they're in business long enough, these firearms can be in circulation for decades. But it's unusual for them to have very many firearms traced to them. So nearly 1,700 dealers had only one firearm traced to them. So I want to kind of have that to sink in. Of the 2,100 firearm dealers that had firearms traced to them, 1,700 of those dealers only had one firearm traced to them. So again, overall, most dealers are doing an excellent job and doing a professional job when it comes to selling firearms. The average number of traces per dealer was 2.3. Again, some of these dealers may have gone in business yesterday. Some of these dealers may have been in business for decades. So overall, we're seeing that this problem is coming from a very small segment of the firearm dealers, not only in New York or in and around Rochester, but throughout the nation. Next, 55% of the crime guns traced were sold by just 10% of those 2,100 dealers. Again, we're starting to narrow things down from over half the firearms only came from 10% of the dealers. So again, a lot of dealers are doing their job. We're narrowing down to identify the ones that aren't. 61% were traced to an original sale by a dealer still in business. So that is also significant because some of these dealers are in business for decades, and we're able to trace them, and they're still conducting business in the community. However, that leaves about 39% were traced to an original sale by a dealer who is no longer in business. And the problem with that is some of these firearms could have been sold by a dealer 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Guns can remain in circulation for years, if not decades, and that's by design. They're usually relatively well made, and if they're just semi-maintained, they can last a lifetime. All right, and I know I've gone through this. Kathy and the city has put out an excellent briefing sheet. I think it's 2 pages, and it talks about some of the more finer details of the trace report and what was actually uncovered. You can get a copy of the report by just looking at the city of Rochester or the Brady campaign's website. It's about 30 pages, and it goes into a lot of detail. Unfortunately, some of that information was redacted by ATF, and we'll go into why they did that and some of the things that we could change in order to get that information. But some recommendations that were made openly to the city and to the police department is continue efforts in tracing crime guns. The police department is doing an excellent job with that. I think they found some ways to do things a little more efficiently and better. So I commend them for that activity. And going forward, that's going to be very valuable information for their investigations. And analyzing the crime gun data to continue this. Whether it'll be on a yearly basis or every 2 years, knowledge is power. Knowing where these firearms are coming from and seeing how the efforts of law enforcement and the community, how the state is doing their inspection process, how the ATF is doing their inspection process of these dealers is very important. And transparency is key here. The more knowledge that the community has, especially when it's being accumulated by the government, we are the people. So that knowledge needs to be passed down to us so we can make better decisions about how we want our communities to move forward. Regulation, training, oversight, and enforcement of firearm dealers. There's a number of ways to look at that. Currently, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms on average inspects dealers every 8 to 10 years. I don't know about you, but I was a far different person 10 years ago. A lot of things have happened in the last decade. If you just look at technology, a lot of technology has changed in the last decade. So doing inspections every 8 to 10 years really isn't doing a very good job at keeping the problematic dealers in line. So we look at state and local inspection programs. Not every state has the ability to do that. Fortunately, New York is one of the states that has the ability to do that, like California. But even in California, there are cities and counties that do their own inspections as well. So that means that these dealers are being inspected every 1 to 3 years. And that way, if there's any problems being identified through these inspections, they can be quickly corrected. We're not looking at hammering every firearm dealer who makes an honest mistake. it happens. But what we look at these inspections for is when it's identified, do they take action to make sure that those mistakes don't continue? So we're looking at regulation and training, oversight, a big C for compliance, small E for enforcement, but make sure that if they're not complying with the law, enforcement on their license can always be an issue and something that the community and the police department and the district attorney needs to take seriously and follow through with. Next, firearm dealers adopted code of conduct. I know Brady has our code of conduct for dealers. There are others out there, but make sure that even beyond what they need to do under the law, whether that's a city ordinance, state law, or a federal law, is that they just have a code of conduct. This is how we're going to do business. And we want to make sure that we're not going to be part of the gun violence issue, and we're going to take steps to do that. It's laid out. One of the big issues with gun violence is a lot of people don't like to talk about suicide. Suicide accounts for a large amount of gun violence, and dealers can be a first step in identifying people that might be having a temporary mental health issue and prevent them from getting access to a very lethal means of suicide. Procurement policies. This is a new issue that has come around probably in the last 2 years, but the power of the almighty dollar really makes a difference. Law enforcement and other government entities purchase their ammunition, their police equipment, and their firearms oftentimes from particular dealers. And some of those dealers might not have the best reputation when it comes to violations, either through a state inspection or through an ATF inspection. So with that, if we want to be spending our taxpayer dollars on firearm procurement, ammunition procurement, we should expect the police department or the city, county, state governments to be procuring that equipment from dealers that are following the law. Now, again, there's going to be mistakes made, but we look at dealers that if they did make a mistake, how quickly did they correct those mistakes? And are they moving forward with professional business? So when the police department, when the government does business with good businesses, again, it shows leadership, and other firearm dealers will adopt better policies in order to compete for those contracts. Finally, destruction policies. The New York Times recently came out with an article about firearm that are being destroyed by various law enforcement agencies and how they're being parted out into parts kits, basically, to the kits that are being used in ghost guns in order for the agencies to save money on destroying the firearm. Now, how it's being done is technically not illegal, but definitely poor business practices, not only by the police department, but by the entities that are destroying the firearms. So if you're going to look at making sure that firearms don't end up back in the street after law enforcement has recovered them, you need to have better destruction policies to make sure the entire firearm is destroyed and the parts of it aren't resold and show up back on the streets of Rochester or any other city. So final one is repeal the Tier-Hart Amendment. The question that you're going to ask is, what is the Tier-Hart Amendment? It was a budget rider back in in the early, I think it was 2001, and basically prevented the FBI and the ATF from providing information that they used to provide to researchers and to the public, specifically information from ATF about firearms that are being traced. So let's say 25, 30 years ago, the information that was provided by ATF was very open about the sources of these firearms, what dealers that they were coming from, and it was very forthcoming and very transparent. After the Tier-Hart Amendment, it really restricted what ATF can provide. And as you see, if you look at the report that was provided to the city of Rochester, the information that Brady wrote was redacted heavily, especially at the end of the report when we're starting to talk about specific dealers and the trends that we've seen. So that was redacted by ATF under the Tier Hart amendment. So one of the biggest things for any community is the knowledge and the data that is out there about the sources of crime guns. The Tier Hart amendment prevents the ATF from providing that. So it makes it difficult for cities like Rochester or even the state of New York to provide information to the public about the sources of this. So a repeal of the Tier Hart amendment is probably the top recommendation for any community if they really want to move forward with knowing where these crime guns are coming from. Finally, I just want everyone to remember, this comes oftentimes from the pro-gun wing of entities saying that you don't know anything about firearms, so you should be part of this discussion. You don't need to be a firearm expert to care about or be part of gun violence prevention. Gun violence affects us all. I'm not an expert on climate change. However, I do my part, and I'm part of organizations. I make sure that I recycle. Again, I'm not an expert on it, but it affects me. It affects my daughter. So I'm going to take action on it. Remember, you don't need to be an expert to care about this issue. With that, I know I went through things relatively quickly. I'm open for any questions.
All right, we're going to take questions in a minute. Steve, hold on 1 second. Give it up for Steve, guys. Just 1 second here. I want to get the view so we could see the rest of the folks. I want to tell you, family, that this is not the sexy stuff, right? And what I mean by that is when you start talking data and numbers and this is not the stuff that you typically see when you talk about gun violence and gun violence prevention. We have the marches, we have the people on the boots on the street, all of those things. And those things are great, and we need all of them. We need all of the above. We have the police officers, law enforcement, the criminal justice system, all of them working in tangent with each other. But the fact of the matter, ladies and gentlemen, is if we really want to see something different in our city and we really want to make a change, we're going to have to do things differently. If we keep doing the same thing, we're going to keep getting the same results. One of the things that I'm born and raised in the city of Rochester. I love this city. I don't want to be nowhere else. I don't want to live anywhere else. I love my city. And I want to see my city to be the safest, best quality of life place that it could ever be for not only myself, my family, your families, our children, our grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. We have to do something different. And what I only speak for myself, I've been on different levels of government. I've served in county government. And once again, grateful to have the vice president here, Legislator Mercedes. I have served in county government. I've served in city government, and I just have not seen the conversation, even on the drug conversation too, is really similar. On the supply side, we typically look at the street corner dealer, those individuals who we see all the time and who are on television and who we hear about. But very seldom do we hear about Brighton, Pittsford, Arundecoit, the root of the problem. And the fact of the matter is, this data that you saw today is not Pennsylvania's data. It's not Chicago's data. It's not California's data. That's Rochester's data. And Rochester data says, now you see we're only one of 5 cities that has this data, this gun trace data report. Chicago, New York City, Pennsylvania, I believe it was, we said Chicago, California, right? And so when you think of those are major, large metropolitan cities, this is Rochester, a mid-sized city. So this data is helping to decrease. We know Chicago's gun problem. We know New York City's, all of those cities have, especially Pennsylvania, I think was Philly was over 800 homicides in a year, I believe. So we know why those cities are doing that, and we know that this data has impacted in a positive way those cities, and they're much larger than Rochester. So quite naturally, this should work, not only work here, but if 55%, if we only did this, and I'm opening up for questions, if 55% of the crime guns that have been confiscated in the city of Rochester, right? 55% of those crime guns have come from 10% of the gun dealers here locally in Monroe County. Really think about that. It's very similar, ladies and gentlemen, to the violence as a whole in that so-called crescent, right? That we're in right now. 14605 is part of that, right? 21, 11, 08, et cetera, right? 09. So when we look at the data of Rochester, 10% of the streets cause 90% of the crimes. So here we're hearing that again, 10% of the gun dealers causing 55% of the crime guns. What am I saying? I'm saying those are solvable solutions. If you told me it was 90% causing the problem or 90% of the streets causing the problem, I would say that's a much bigger problem for us to solve. But 10% is all we have to start focusing on, right? And they've gave us the solutions on how to focus on those things. So I really want you to understand. So when we did the data report, I think it went over a lot of people's, they didn't really grasp it, right? And so that's why we're doing these sessions. So you can really understand how important this data is, how we're going to be using this data, how we're going to be implementing these recommendations, and how we anticipate that number of crime, violence, and crime guns significantly going down as we approach this from the supply side. Does that make sense? Questions for anybody? Just step to that microphone. They can only hear you if you speak through that mic. Any questions you may have for Steve, myself, or Steve?
Hi, Steve. I have 3 quick questions. 2 of them go together. The first question is that number, the 50% of, well, it wasn't 50, but that number as far as the dealers that it came from, was that Monroe County or was that statewide for the 10%?
So there is a homegrown problem in Monroe County, but that was more of just overall traces. So that's both Monroe County, state of New York, and just some other dealers outside New York and throughout the nation.
Do you
But-
know? Oops, sorry, go ahead.
I'm just saying, again, but it only comes down to 10% of the dealers, whether that can be dealt with on a state level or the federal level. It really narrows down and focuses the attention for law enforcement or for ATF in order to address the problem. It's not insurmountable. We're talking about a small number of dealers that are causing a majority of the problem.
Do we know how many, if any, are in Monroe County?
Yes, that was part of the information that unfortunately was redacted by ATF, but the police department does have the unredacted report and has the data. So how they take action with that, again, if it's outside of the city of Rochester, it makes it a little more difficult, but that's part for the politicians and for the police department to put pressure on the state of New York or on ATF to at least inspect and take action on the licenses of the dealers that are causing a majority of the problem.
Yes. So just to piggyback on that, Steve, and it's a good question. And some of you, I'll reiterate because some of you may have not really fully understood what he said, is that when we did this report, we were given the green light by everyone to put the whole report out unredacted and to be transparent. 48 hours before we got ready to release this report, we were told that we had to redact the report. Now, I have the original report. I know exactly where the guns are coming from, and they're not the corner stores. They're not the Arabs, which we've been hearing for years. Right, Vic? We've been hearing that for years. I run a barbershop. Everybody said, you might got 1 or 2 people trying to do something, but that's where there are no gun dealers in the city of Rochester, period. These guns are coming from our suburbs. That's where they're coming from. Okay. We know exactly where they're coming from. They wouldn't allow us to show you the actual names of places that you probably shop in, that where they're coming from, that's killing our babies. That's that TR amendment that we also need to be fighting. So when we're talking to our federal legislators and folks, these are the types of things that we need to be saying to them. Like, look, why is this information not available? We want all of the data to be transparent to the public. We deserve that. We deserve to have that information. Just recently, when we did our press conference yesterday, two police officers were killed in Syracuse. Now, wouldn't it be interesting to see where those crime guns came from that killed those officers, right? That's very important information. We have a open data portal here, RPD does. Wouldn't it be very informative to not only have the name of the person, where they were shot, how old they were, et cetera, but also where the time to crime time and where that gun came from. Imagine if dealers knew that that information was being captured and being shared and being spread and open to the public on a daily, minute basis. That would be a game changer. I'm sorry, Marcus.
And the second part of the second question, it's two parts, is about parcellated data. Do you have parcellated data on the amount of gun violence, the crime versus the suicide that you can share with us? That's the first part of the question. I'll let you respond.
Yeah, I can provide that to Kathy and the councilman, and I can be provided to you. But it's roughly over 50% of gun violence issues across the nation deal with suicide.
Thank you. And again, with the parcellated data question, how many firearms that are being used in these so-called, I guess we're saying violent crime, I guess that includes the suicides, are from dealers from over 20 years ago?
So I don't have that actually broken down in a format that I can share. That part of that was the information that was redacted by ATF, and I'm precluded from putting that information out.
So Marcus, and it's very troubling, brother, because you're asking questions that we actually have the answers to, but we can't tell you, right? And so we have a MOU agreement with Brady and the city of Rochester, and thank Steve for doing as much as he can to try to get out as much information as we can. But we have a difference of opinion on that. We believe all of that information should be public. We're fighting to get that information public. And we're going to keep doing what we can to advocate to get that information public. And so the city, yeah. So Steve, the question on the floor was, what is the reason? Say that again, Clay. The justification of not releasing all of the data. And there's conversation on the floor of that being suppressing evidence and this TR amendment. Can you just briefly kind of go back over that again? Because I think that may have not been fully understood of why, or the premise that they're using, legal premise that they're using to not be able to release that data.
So ATF's hands are a little bit tied in this issue. They have to follow federal law, especially as a federal law enforcement agency. And under the T-Hart Amendment, it prevents them from releasing that information. There's probably various philosophies and ideologies about why the T-Hart Amendment went into effect, but it is a protection of the firearm industry. So the way that I look at that, and again, I'm not an attorney, but from my law enforcement background, is there information that law enforcement needs from that trace data? Yes. Should some of that information be withheld for law enforcement to do their an investigation? Yes. But at some point, that information should be made public. This is information that we are paying for through our tax dollars. And I think we have a right to know, if for no other reason that we want to do business with firearm dealers that are doing good business. So we can get into a long discussion. It's more of a legal discussion about Tierhart. Not happy that the parts of the report was redacted, but ATF was just doing their job under federal law. So their solution to it is to repeal the Tierhart Amendment and get open, transparent information, and that will allow ATF to share that information with the general public throughout the nation.
Now, yes, that's a law. It's on the books. It is a law. Hold on. I want to finish with Marcus' question so we can get some other one. I want to say this too. Mike Curran, who's ATF representative here locally, regionally here, he's a partner with us. He gives us a lot of information. One of the things he said at our coalition meetings is that they could use more inspectors, right? They could use more staff. So we know that is a need that he put out there. And we know one of the recommendations was that these dealers, these 10% that's causing the majority of the problems, that they be inspected more frequently, right? And that they adhere to the Gun Dealers Code of Conduct, which the New York State legislature has passed, right? So we know that that's an area or somewhere where also we could advocate for to our federal partners through our senators and our Congress folks to why aren't they beefing up these ATF agencies when they know that these things, only 10% of the people are causing this problem? This is a solvable problem. And I'm going to tell you, because of the politics around it, it's a lot of money lobbying these businesses. Big lobbyers, they lobby the state and the federal government. A lot of the gun industry is a huge multi-billion dollars of an industry. And that's what's causing some of this blockage, if you will, because they know the impact of that information getting in the hands of law enforcement and to the public, that the public could speak with their feet or their pockets, if you will, and boycott a lot of these businesses, if you will. So I'm going to have Marcus with your last final question, sir, and then we're going to move on.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'd like to thank you for pointing out that we have such good stewards as gun dealers in our state, even though we have the 6th fewest number of gun dealerships in the whole country. We have a disproportionate amount of violent crime with guns. So it seems that there's also some more there. And I'd like to thank you very much for pointing out that we have a lot of good stewards and the majority of the dealers are doing what's right. As my last follow-up to Willie, and I'm going to have a seat, is we've got to be able to sue somebody for that data, for that information outside of the Tierhart Amendment or whatever, specifically for this segmentation of this specific data that we've gotten. There's got to be somebody that we can sue. Is that the federal government? Is that the state government? Is that the ATF themselves? Is it individual legislature? Somebody can get us that information, and we have to take that to court if we want that information. Who do we go after?
Gotcha. Thank you. Thank you. Steve, you want to answer that? I know Brady does a lot of that work on the advocacy side and even on the lawsuit side. Do you have anything to say to that?
So I can't provide legal advice, but this is a federal amendment. So you would have to, the attorneys would have to look at federal law in order to make that change, or just have it change on the legislative side of things. It's been in place well over 20 years. And at least how I see that, and a lot of other entities look at it, this is information that we're paying for. This isn't national intelligence secrets. This is about where these crime guns are coming from. The information is out there, and we're paying for it. We should be provided it.
So just before you answer your questions, Rev, I want to keep this energy in the place that the good news, right? The good news is that we have a lot of data that we have that could help move us forward in the recommendations that have already been recommended to Rochester. We're the Rock Against Gun Violence Coalition, the mayor for his support. The police department has been very supportive. ATF has been working with us as best they possibly can, and we're going to implement as many of these recommendations as we possibly can this year. We're going to recommend for our partners that are not city, all roads don't lead to City Hall. All of those recommendations are not in the privy of the city council or the mayor. But what we can't do, we're going to recommend that our other partners, for instance, the first thing we did right off the bat, one of the recommendations that you don't have, there were some other recommendations that we have discovered as well. We sent a letter immediately to all of our partners in the suburbs, and we asked them to enforce the gun dealers code of conduct and to have their local gun dealers within their jurisdictions to start to begin to look at enforcing them. So we're planting a seed that, like, we're watching, we're paying attention, we're starting a different conversation. This conversation may not been had with them before. So we're saying this is the conversation we're having. We're not letting off of this conversation, and we're expecting these things to happen. And so that was one of a recommendation that was given to us, and we implemented that one immediately. And we're going to continue to do as many of these recommendations as we can. So that's the good news, is that we're moving in the right direction to better attack or look at these 10% of the people that are causing the problem. Rev, go ahead.
Steve, first let me say thank you for your report and your effort. My question is, how often are these are the 10% inspected unannounced, and then when they are caught in violation, what is the level of consequences, fines, and is there any kind of suspension?
So unfortunately, because of staffing levels, ATF, and again, I'm not blaming them as an entity. Their budget is controlled by Congress. And with that, they really have not grown significantly over the past 50 years. So, and I believe that's by design from the gun industry, in order to have a boogeyman that's out there, the ATF, but not actually give them the resources to adequately do the job. So their inspections, depending on the area and depending on the issue, are roughly every 8 to 10 years. That's a large time frame. And even when they do find a violation, some violations are very minor. Again, it's slight oversights by the dealer. Some violations are relatively significant, but there is a small portion of dealers that are actually any type of violation is uncovered, and an even smaller portion of those that ATF is able to take action on. That's why one of the things that can really affect this issue, especially if the crime guns are coming from in or around a particular community, is state and local ordinances on how these dealers conduct their business, and then state and local inspections, so they can take more immediate action than the federal government can. That's one of the things that has happened out here in California. Is California has its own inspection program, but there are a number of cities in California that also have their own inspection programs of the firearm dealers that are within their cities. And if you look at what they've done over time, this isn't going to change overnight, but it's a long-term solution. And part of a long-term solution is, they have reduced gun violence because the dealers are doing a better job at their business.
Okay, it sounds like though, even with the 10%, that 8 to 10 year span leaves a lot of room and opportunity for them to continuously have an escape.
Unfortunately, yes. One of the very frustrating parts of this is we know where the crime guns are coming from. It's not like it's an unknown entity. We know where they're coming from. These businesses are regulated. However, they're not being adequately regulated. And yes, that's a large time frame. 10 years, let's say, even if it's 5 years, that's a large time frame, and a lot of bad business can be done. especially by those dealers that are doing bad business. Again, that is a small percentage, but it's not like we don't know what dealers are causing the problems. Yet, because of resources, ATF can't take the proper action.
And that was one of the things that when the coalition took on this role, and Kathy, we were, brought this to my attention of the data reports that Brady are able to do, why we wanted to do this, because we wanted to end that question of where are the guns coming from. We were so excited to be able to get to the point where we can literally list the names of that, and then 48 hours before we do that, they go, oh, by the way, you can't do that, right? So we're very discouraged by that part, but we're encouraged by the information that we do have. And because we have the information internally, we can still act on the information that we have. Yes.
Hi, hello. Thank you for holding the forum. My name is Antonia Winter. I just want a clarification on something that I'm a little out of the loop, but I know in the past, hi Kathy, when we were talking about tracing, building up to this point, when we talked about the ghost guns, are there any traceable parts, like we talked about how they manufactured them? Are there serial numbers on individual parts? Because I think that was one of the problems that you specified, is that people or manufacturers were making parts that could be later used for whatever. But I think there was a time where we were saying that only part A and part B together could make something that would, be able to be used as a gun. Right. So part one of my question is, are there serial numbers on individual parts for clarification? And if not, why aren't we doing that?
So there is, okay. A classic ghost gun will not have any serialization whatsoever. So a number of different cities, states, and even ATF regulations are starting to change what is the definition of a firearm in order for one, it to be serialized, and two, for it to have to go through at least a basic background check through the federal government for the purchase, in order to prevent it from being purchased by a prohibited person. But the damage has already kind of been done, and the laws do change from from state to state about the regulation of ghost guns. So no, there's no serialization. However, some of the ghost gun manufacturers do put their brand on it. Let's say Polymer 80 is one of the, or at least was one of the biggest ghost gun manufacturers. So with that, a number of different communities and states have taken legal action against Polymer 80 and some of the other lesser known ghost gun manufacturers because they are pumping these firearms into our communities that are being used as crime dens. So it might not be able to be traced to an individual purchaser, but they oftentimes can be traced to the manufacturer.
And just to follow up, Antonio, I believe on that as well. One thing that we could do is, because we know that Captain Murrah is a part of our partner for our Rock Against Gun Violence Coalition, and he was talking about that. I believe that the city of Rochester is just now starting, and correct me if I'm wrong, Vic, starting to now collect the ghost gun information. They used to didn't kind of, because that wasn't an issue before, but now they're starting to collect that data too, and starting to trace that. So what we can start doing is looking to see if there's any trends to manufacturers that may be stamping them and maybe doing that, and we can start looking at that as well. And then maybe we can put class action lawsuits against them, as we have done in the past for the tobacco industry and other industries that the city have sued. We have a litigation as against the gun manufacturers now. I think that the mayor did that very soon. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Who was right here in this church last year. Go ahead.
Second part of my question is, much like marijuana, when it began to be legalized, there were a lot of Black and brown people who were incarcerated because of the sales.
Mhm.
And now it became a market where you can have a dispensary and make quite a bit of money from it. And unfortunately, a market that many Black and brown people have not been able to tap into. When we talk about tracing these guns back because of the innumerable amount of lives that have been lost, the shootings, the trauma to communities that reverberates over and over and over, how do we, you know, hold people accountable when we talk about the companies, when we talk about these class action lawsuits? Is that something that we can put also into a civil suit of some kind, you know, for compensation, or, you know, because like, you know, I just really even can't even put it into words. You know, so many people have lost their lives for guns that are coming into our communities, you know, and these are crimes that we've been made victims of.
The answer
And
to that,
and maybe we don't have an answer to that question.
no, we
but, you
do.
know,
It's yes. It's absolutely yes.
Okay.
And that's why I believe it's not just the city of Rochester. I believe the suit that we're in is a multi municipality suit. It's Syracuse, it's Buffalo. I believe Albany is involved in it as well too. And so what ends up, it's kind of like with the tobacco industry. What ends up happening is once these municipalities win this suit, then there has to be a payout, if you will, to those municipalities. It's almost like what we see happening with the opiate situation and all of that, you know, and that just brings up a whole array of other questions and issues. But nonetheless, that's exactly what you would want to happen. The best case scenario is that you would win those suits, and then there would be money that would be kicked back to those municipalities, and which hopefully would be kicked back to the community in some form or another.
And a segue of that, and I'm done, is when we're talking about, I think somebody mentioned guns that may have been manufactured by companies 20 years ago that are no longer in existence. Isn't there, I mean, you have to have personal information before you open a business, do a DBA, you know, LLC, any number of one of those things. So there should be some traceable personal information to say, hey, this person, Jane Doe, John Doe, was attached to, you know, Polymer or whatever the company is that produced these guns X amount of years ago that causes damage present day.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, yes, we agree. And that's one of the things that we are hoping to be a part of, recommending that we have not only the more inspections, but that once that information, and we hold these individuals accountable who have these infractions and have consistent infractions, to include those who've had them going back dated to decades, that information be public. It's just, you know, that's what we're saying. You know, it's almost, and this may sound very weird or whatever, but I think about and this is just a simple concept. Lyle Avenue. There was a council member, Stevenson, I believe, years ago, who would take the names of the people that were soliciting people on Lyle Avenue, and they were putting those names in the paper. Now imagine how impactful when your wife pick up the paper and see her husband's name in the paper for soliciting somebody on Lyle Avenue. The impact of that is tremendous, right? So the transparency of accountability in this gun violence is just as impactful if we are able to give out the information of not only the companies that are causing this stuff, but then let's go even a little further. A lot of the guns that end up as the crime guns are not just through straw purchasing, but also because that's how Officer McCurkowitz and also the firefighters that were out in Webster, where that gentleman bought a gun through straw purchase. But not only through straw purchasing, but we know a large number of the guns that make it into the hands of crime guns in our community are also stolen guns. And so that is loose law of how reporting stolen guns is also very loose, and no accountability necessary that. But that takes us into a whole nother realm of, you know, freedom of carry arms and people, because there was a legislature not too long ago who wanted to have a gun safe bill and penalize people from getting their guns stolen off. And that was very controversial. It was in the county legislature, actually. It was very controversial. So, you know, when you start talking to this gun talk, it becomes very, it's a very touchy situation because people, of course, and I am a licensed, to be very clear, I am a licensed gun owner. So I don't want anybody to think that I'm anti-gun or anti-people owning guns. I believe we don't have legal gun owner people killing people. That's not the problem that we have. Okay. And he said, if you put a gun in everybody's hand, you still ain't gonna stop this issue. You know, that's not, we're not a safer city, is what he said, right? So what I'm saying is there should be some accountability to the source of where these guns are trafficking into our community. So that's what we're shining light on that today. And in these sessions, that's the light that we're shining on there. And then we also want to do something about it as well. Go ahead, legislator.
Councilman Lightfoot, thank you so much for putting this forum together. This has been incredibly informative. My name is Mercedes Vasquez Simmons. Today I am here as the Executive Director of the Latino Youth Development and Resource Center. Our primary focus is dealing with young people directly impacted by gun violence. Just recently we dealt with a young girl whose house was shot up. She now sleeps underneath her bed because of fear. And this is going to be a lifetime impact. We have a tendency of focusing on the effects. So this gives us a different perspective. And again, thank you, because this is, now we can sort of kind of help resolve this. And to your point, this is solvable. You know, we hear statistics that, you know, crime is down or gun violence is down. But when you see what happens into these communities, you see young people running around with guns and the impact, the PTSD that we are raising a generation of children who are terrified. You know, they're saying they're sensitive. No, these kids are dealing with elements that we didn't have to deal with as young people. So I thank you so much for providing this forum that we can talk about this. Where are these guns coming from? I read in this document here that was it 57% of guns recovered are from out of state. I'd be curious to know just your opinion on Governor Hochul's interstate task force, how impactful that has been. I would love to see some type of signage on the throughway to say, if you are carrying guns, just know that you're going to do prison time if caught. I just don't see that sense of urgency. Thank you. I don't see that sense of urgency to say, we're going to stop the supply of this. You see, again, we deal with the impact. We're dealing with the communities that are mourning every single day. Listen, off North Clinton Avenue, where the center is, we've got a collection of different memorials. I'm tired of these memorials. I want flowers, real flowers for betterment, not plastic flowers as a memorial. I'd like to see more directly impacted things, intentional things to say, we have to stop this supply and demand. It's coming from somewhere. The demand is there. That's we can't do anything about the demand, but the supplies are coming from somewhere, and we have to stop that pipeline. So I'm curious to know about just, I guess, your opinion on the governor's rollout. I just think it's not enough. That's my opinion, but I would love to hear from you. Thank you so much again for this.
Steve, do you have any insight on that or want to speak to any of what you've heard?
I don't really have the data on that program. I don't believe it's been produced, but it is definitely a step in the right direction in looking at the source of where these firearms come from. Again, one of the issues that we have is the Tier Hart Amendment. It's not like we don't know, or law enforcement doesn't know where this is coming from. These firearms are coming from. So providing that to the public is definitely an issue. Knowledge is power, but even without that, this is a known quantity to law enforcement, whether that's at the federal, state, or local level, and they can take action against these dealers.
Right. And so I also want to say this, and we have two more people, and we're going to be wrapping up after them. 7:30 is our stopping time. We do have two more sessions that we're going to be having that to be very similar to this, and we'll talk about them before we break. But I want to say this. This is why the information is important, because when you have, this is an election year, right? This is an election year. We're voting for a president. You're voting for a congressperson. You're voting for state people. These are the types of questions you need to be asking the people who are asking for your vote and who are asking for you to support them. Ask them these very pointed questions of, how do you feel about the TR law? What are you going to do around gun violence in our community? What? Uh-huh. Mhm. So I think it's important that these informative informations are important, that we have this education so that you're a more informed voter, right? We're going to be doing voter registration at the next two events. We didn't have enough time to schedule that for today, but that's why we're doing that as well, because your vote does matter. And people, and these are some of the issues that are most important to our communities. Mr. Clay.
Yeah, first of all, I just want to, everybody give a round of applause for Councilman Lightfoot, because this is a real serious issue. It's more serious than we really know. We always talk about the violence, right? And there's only like 5 cities. Rochester is really a medium-sized city, right? So for him to be able to work with the Brady organization and other law enforcement, I just want to commend him for that, because it's making a difference. So thank you, brother.
Bless you. Thank you.
And I wasn't going to say anything about this, but Mercedes, you brought it up. I'm normally a really pretty diplomatic person, because I try to cover, everybody, right? But you know why they ain't doing nothing about these guns? Yeah, it's money, but it's killing Black and brown people. Mm-hmm. And the powers that be who say they really care, they don't really care, because if they really cared, they would be getting these guns off the streets, and they wouldn't let these technicalities in this law. I mean, I didn't even touch this years ago, but the opioid epidemic, it was in the suburbs. It wasn't even in the city. And then, boy, they was doing a whole heap of stuff about it. And so we got to hold our elected officials accountable. That's what I'm talking about. You say they come and get our vote, hold them accountable. If you really care about your voters, don't care what color they is and where they're from, then do something about it to save their lives. That's not what I was going to say. What I was about to say in terms of my question is, one is that 10%, I don't think that should be an excuse or justification that they don't have enough law enforcement to inspect all of these dealers, when in fact only 10% is the perpetrators, if you will. Why don't they use a target approach to those 10% and shut them down? Okay. Mm-hmm. Period. Done.
Well, Brother Clay, just want to piggyback on that. I've been saying the same thing about the concentrated areas and poverty that's in the city. We know 10% of the streets cause 90% of the issues. The same concentrated effort could be put to those 10% of those neighborhoods as well, too.
They don't care. So that's my point, and I think that needs to be dealt with. And what I want to know is how these guns that are being recovered, I just want to stay local, right? What is RPD doing with those guns? If it was like 6,000 or whatever covered from 12 to 22 or something like that, what did they do, and what are they doing with those guns?
We were told, that question was asked in one of our Rock Against Gun Violence Coalition meetings. We were told that those guns are being destroyed.
Well,
is what we were told.
That's part of my point. Mm-hmm. We want to show some verification that these guns is being destroyed and not being recirculated, right? I'm mm-hmm. not going to go any further than that. Y'all can infer from that. Now, the other thing is, how are we making sure, because y'all got the information, law enforcement got the information in terms of no redaction, right? So who's holding law enforcement accountable that they are not just watching them dealers, but they are arresting them dealers.
There's no gun dealers in the city of Rochester.
No, I don't mean.
Okay, so
well,
no,
I
I'm
just say
saying,
law enforcement, period.
right. So
Whether it's in the suburbs.
what I'm saying to you, you said y'all, right? So
Mhm.
that means, well, I take that as
got
me,
you, I got you.
right? So as far as city government is concerned, there are no gun dealers in the city of Rochester. We
Okay,
have
so
no
let me take-
jurisdiction over Brighton, Irondequoit, Henrietta, or any of those places.
I got you.
So that's why we sent a letter. We started with a letter, right? To say, hey, this information is available. They don't have the redacted version. The police officers may have information that they receive from ATF, because ATF information is available to law enforcement, right? But this, as far as this report is concerned, this report was given to the city of Rochester, right? The redacted version was given to the mayor and to the city of Rochester. So I can only speak to the report.
So
I can't
got
speak to
you.
anything else.
I misspoke,
Mhm.
but my point still remains, so let me broaden it.
Mhm.
In terms of the suburbs or wherever they are located, whatever that municipality is, whatever the law enforcement jurisdiction that oversees that, how are we, I'm just saying, right? Whether it's Monroe County Sheriff, whether it's Gates, whether it's Grease, whether state, whatever, how are we now going to have the necessary dialogue with them to and to encourage them to follow what's being done here to shut them down?
Yeah, so that's the next. Thank you for the question. Good question. That's the next phase after we finish these public hearings or these public informational sessions. After the public information session, the Rock Against Gun Violence Commission, we actually have about 6 major events, and we have a huge youth summit event that Ruth Reeves, who is here, who runs our youth committee, who we're going to be having, because we really want to engage our young people too, because we're hearing so much from our young people, and they need to be a part of their solutions to these issues as well. And so, but one of the next piece, we're doing these 3 sessions. The next session is next week on the 23rd, 6 o'clock. At Ark of the Covenant, 60 Lorimer Street. The pastor's here, Pastor Nolan Williams. We'll be having the same conversation. You may come up with some different questions there as well to address the reason we're moving this conversation around throughout the different quadrants of the city so that we can reach different audiences within the city. The last of these sessions, Lord willing, will be May 7th at Greater Adams Street Church of God by Faith, which is 230 Adams Street. Same time. It would also be streamed. This session is being streamed on the City Council YouTube page. So you can go back and look at this conversation, share this conversation with your friends and information. After that, we're reconvening our Rock Against Gun Violence Coalition group, which we meet every second Monday of every month at City Hall. It's a hybrid meeting. It's on Zoom and it's in person. We have these conversations updated monthly by all of the people involved. ATF, city, Vic and his team come every month and update us on the work that's happening real time within our city government, real time on a monthly basis. We're putting together a session where we're going to be having a conversation with all of law enforcement. We're going to be having a conversation, a very pointed conversation with all, which I don't believe has ever happened before. With all of the, we're going to have that conversation. We're going to have that conversation. And after that conversation, this coalition, which we came here a year ago and we launched in the community effort, and we thank all of you for being a part of that effort of putting together the solution action plan with those 12 solutions that we can. We're coming back to this community to say, hey, here's what we're going to do. Here's the laws, the policy, the practices, everything that we're implementing now, right? And here's the stuff that we can't do. Here's what we're recommending our community partners do. And here's what we're recommending law enforcement do. And in the action plan, there was a piece for everybody, to include Grandma Numb, the church, the faith community, the CBOs, the community-based organizations. There's a piece for everybody has a role to play in eradicating this violence in our community. I'm going to have my sister here with her final question, and then we're going to close out. Or comment. Yes.
I just want to say thank you to Mr. Lightfoot and
You're
Steve
welcome.
for putting this together tonight. We all seem to know what the problem is, and gun violence is like a cancer.
Mhm.
Some of it is in the brain, some of it is in the prostate, some of it in the breast. It's all over. What we don't do is treat it properly. We'll Band-Aid it and give it a little treatment, and it'll go in remission.
Mhm.
Statistically, it looks like it's being fixed and eradicated.
Mm.
And if one person, one of these gun owners, and we know they're not in the city because it's not a city problem. It's the people dying in the city more often, but it's the people that are being hidden, that are not being talked about, that are part of the cancer spreading. And we need to deal with that. That needs to be transparent. It needs to come across the board. We need to stop hiding with the cloak and dagger, with the politicians, the powers that be, the people that have the power and influence, because we can keep electing people and, going out and voting, but the violence is still there. People are still dying every day. Cops should not have to not come home at night. Council members should not have to be worried about these things as they are. None of us should have to worry about it, but I think it seems like the system is set up for gun violence to keep going on. We can change it to a degree, and we can Band-Aid it a little bit, but it's gonna always be part of the narrative. But each one of us can make change little by little if we stay in the fight, and it's at a snail's pace, but we all can do our part, and it can get better, but I don't think we will kill it off. But we all can do our part to help change the narrative and put a positive light on the city, because it appears that the city is being ostracized by what's going on in the city, when the problem is really in the suburbs, which is, it's closeted in the suburbs where where the guns are, clearly, because there are no gun owners or gun shops in the city of Rochester. We clearly know that. So I'm gonna sit down because I can just keep going, but I'll save and put my questions in better format. But I just want to say thank you for the session tonight, and I look forward to more conversation, endeavors, and brainstorming to get
Yes.
the city of Rochester in a better state.
And I'm sure there's a definitive answer. I completely forgot that someone asked me last week. And I said, oh, I'll check into it for you. And until we had this conversation, I only just remembered it. They were in the process of cleaning out a house of an elderly relative. And they came upon a locked container which holds a handgun and a shotgun. What are next steps for proper? Yes.
You call the police. Yeah, that's the next step. You call the police. That happened to me. Not in that particular, not in my particular manner, but my father passed away. And when my dad passed away, he had some weapons. And so when I discovered the weapons, now I have a license to carry and a permit, and I didn't quite know what to do. I think I called someone and they told me to call the police, and they came and they took the weapons and they put them into custody. And then I had to go through a process to retrieve the weapons and then have the weapons placed on my permit. That was how the process went. And then that's what I did. And I was able to get those weapons back into my possession and legally under my name.
Okay, so if it's a suburb, it's the county sheriff? And if it's
Yes.
the city, it's RPD?
Yes.
And they don't have any permits, so they just want it gone. They want it legally
Call law
gone.
enforcement.
Okay.
Call
Thank
law
you.
enforcement. You're welcome. All right. So thank him, but we'll thank him later. But we're grateful for everyone coming out. Give yourselves a round of applause. I really appreciate your time. And one thing about it, I'm very, very, very serious about people's time because I respect your time. This is a very, very, very serious topic. Okay. I thank Vic Saunders for being here from the Office of the Mayor. We have some people here that can help. All of us can help be a part of making that change. we say join us, the Rock Against Gun Violence Coalition. You want to figure out what to do? Join us. The coalition seeks more individuals and organizations to get involved and help educate, advocate, and eradicate gun violence in Rochester. Our meetings occur on the second Monday of the month at 6 p.m. in City Council chambers. If you cannot join us in person, you can participate with Zoom or watch on the council's YouTube channel or Facebook page. If you're interested in joining the coalition, please, you can receive us, go to the meetings, or you can receive us via email, or you can call myself at my office, 585-428-6554. The Rochester City Council office, you can call at 585-428-7538, or you can email my legislative aide who had to leave early, Andre at andre.gully at cityofrochester.gov. Once again, the next meeting will be on the 23rd. Also, please make sure that you sign the sign-in sheet in the back. If you're interested in joining our coalition or committee from our coalition, we do have several committees that we have for our coalition. And if you want to be a part of one of those committees and our leadership team, to 22nd. Did I have the wrong date? Excuse me, I'm sorry. The 22nd is the next meeting. No, the 23rd. It's the 23rd. Yeah, it's the 23rd. It's Tuesday. They're all on Tuesdays. Yep, no, you're fine. It's the 23rd. You really messing me. Yes, I thought I had my stuff tight tonight, y'all. So it's the 23rd. Okay, thank you. Advocacy Committee, the Education Committee, the Eradication Committee, the Media Committee, the Resource Committee, the Youth Committee. Like I said, we're getting ready to have a monster youth session summit with our young people. It's going to be amazing. And then we're going to have a session with our law enforcement. And then we're going to be releasing our recommendations and our action plan through City Council. The Rock Against Gun Violence Coalition is under the umbrella of the Public Safety Committee of City Council. City Council, I chair the Public Safety Committee. The Public Safety Committee is included all 9 council members. And then 2 of the council members, the president and the vice president of City Council, are also chairs of committees. One, Council Vice President Harris is the chair of the Media Committee, and Council President Miguel Melendez is the chair of the Advocacy Committee. So they are very heavily involved. I'm sure they'll be at another one of these events. They couldn't be here tonight, but we're grateful for each and every one of you. If you have ideas, thoughts, concerns, or things that could help us to move this needle forward against this violence in our community, please reach out to us and be a part of that. Share a friend, tell a friend about the meeting on next week and the final one on May 7th, so we can continue this dialogue. All right. May God bless you. May God keep you is our prayer. I'm going to ask Elder Daly if he would come and lead us out in prayer. And then after that, we're going to be going. Okay.
Go home. First of all, I want to say this, Mr. Clay, let's talk about Ella Lightfoot. Seriously, this man, he take people to heart. He really does. He cares about people. And I know him. I be around him a lot. You have been around him too, but he cares about people, not by himself. There are a lot of people in position, all they care about themselves. Am I right, somebody? A name, me, I. But what about the people? God concerned about everybody. All right, I just wanted to say that. Maybe could we stand? We're going to be dismissed to go home. But we still praying and coming together. We can't do it without prayer. Can't do it without God. That's right. Can't do it without God. We go to God.